is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
So if you've made the mistake of turning on the news lately, you've seen the incredible division that's happening in the United States of America. And that division is only made worse by politicians who profit from that division on both sides of the aisle. And America is more divided now than it probably has ever been in its history. Because of that, it's gotten to the point where you are maybe sometimes reticent to even talk with your neighbor about the things that really matter. And so I want to bring on the podcast today somebody who's thought a lot about this topic and has written a book about it, Dr. Bruce Hartman. And now, Bruce, you've been thank you for coming on the show with us, first of all.
You're welcome.
You've been CFO of Fortune 500 companies. You've done a lot of work in the corporate space. What made you decide to start writing books about spending a year with Jesus?
Well, I left the corporate world about 10 years ago, Chuck, and I entered theological school, and initially just to get a master's in divinity. And I thought my career goal there would be to be a pastor in a church. As I was doing my studies, I couldn't really feel that calling. And I knew it was something different. And I had a number of great professors and advisors that said that I should be looking at an alternative ministry. So I went on, because I hadn't really resolved that, I went on and got my doctorate degree. So over a period of about 7 years, I studied Jesus. And I was very Jesus-centric in my studies. Being a business person, you learn very quickly, you get right to the point. So to me, the point was Jesus, and everything goes through Jesus, and everything was created by Jesus. So the more I could know about Jesus, the better I personally would be, and the better I could help the world. So as I was getting near the end of my education, a number of people said, "Geez, you should write a book combining what you learned in the business world with what you learned about Jesus." So I did that, and my first book was called Jesus and Company. And it's a book about combining business ethics with Christian ethics, and they're remarkably similar. A lot of ministers tell me that's a really bad combination, business and Jesus, but it isn't. It's a very, very practical application, because if you treat your customers as you would treat yourself, you're going to have a lot of customers. Yeah. And the second book I wrote was Your Faith Has Made You Well. And the reason why I wrote that book was I saw that a lot of people didn't understand the mutual relationship with Jesus. Jesus loves us, but we also have to have faith in Jesus. And our healing comes from recognizing Jesus's love, but having faith in that love. So it's a wonderful book where I interviewed probably 50 people, got their life stories and their healing stories and how faith did help them. Then I moved on to spend a year with Jesus. One of the things I noticed, and what I'm trying to help people with, is having a very strong relationship with Jesus. And part of this is recognizing how we treat our neighbor. And there's a heavy emphasis in the book using scripture and verses and questions. How should we treat our neighbor? And I think the essence of what you talked about this civil war, is we're not treating each other as neighbors anymore.
Well, I mean, so let's get down to the nitty gritty on that. I think that in America today, we actually have two different nations that live in this, that are trying to occupy the same space. And the citizens of those two nations approach everything from a mutually exclusive worldview. Their foundational precepts are completely 180-degree opposite. One nation, one group of people says that there's no such thing as truth, which is, as you know, is a sort of self-contradictory worldview, if you can accept the fact that there's no such thing as truth, that it's true that there is no truth, then you can pretty much accept anything. Like the new uh, director or secretary of Health and Human Services is a man who believes he's a woman, and that's okay. I mean, you can think, oh, that's great. That's a great person to have leading the Department of Health and Human Services. The that citizenry, that group of people in America, believes that men should be able to use women's bathrooms, that babies should be able to be murdered up to the point of birth and maybe beyond that. Those are not things where we can meet in the middle. Those are not things. The only thing that can happen is one side can go to the other side, or not. There's no middle ground when it comes to murdering babies. So the other group of people in America believes that there is such a thing as truth, and truth then brings such a thing as right and wrong. And right and wrong isn't like a flavor of ice cream that you just get to pick what makes sense to you or what you like, but it exists outside of you. So those two worldviews are mutually exclusive. They cannot exist in the same space. So how do you propose in your book that Christians approach this time that we're living in?
Yeah, so I had set, as I was thinking about this call this morning, Chuck, I listed out 7 things that would help with this issue you're talking about. And the first is to pray and know Jesus and get comfortable with your own behavior. I hear people say all the time, well, I'm going to get them. And I always say to them, if I'm comfortable and they're comfortable hearing what I have to say, is that really what Jesus would want you to do? The ends don't always justify the means, and nor do the means always justify the ends.
Yeah.
But you have to know Jesus. And that's one of the reasons why we wrote this book, was to help people learn who Jesus was. The second thing I see a lot of now, and when we're in the corporate world, you have a saying, and almost every CFO and CEO in America knows what I'm going to say next. It's listen to learn. You don't listen to argue. You listen to learn. You try to find out why that person is saying what they're saying. I walked the Appalachian Trail a couple of years ago, and we were met in one of the trail towns, which is, the hollows of America, the backwoods, the mountain people of America. And the person introduced himself as, "Hi, I'm Chuck, and I'm a deplorable." Well, we can't have Americans being called deplorables. And they're human beings, and they're God's people. So when we don't listen to learn, we don't get to learn about what Chuck's life is like. We don't get to learn that he has to work 3 jobs and his wife works 2 jobs, and he believes in the fundamental principles of freedom in America. So that's the second thing. The third thing is that I spend a lot of time, this gets me in trouble, Chuck, this one. I seek truth and facts. So in other words, if I'm listening to Wolf Blitzer, I'll hear what he has to say, but I'll go to the source that he's quoting. And I will tell you, particularly with Wolf, at least half the time he's misquoted what he's saying. For instance, I heard the other night he was talking about the impeachment of Trump. And he was saying Republicans are white supremacists, which is a terrible thing to say. Republicans are white supremacists and they're lackeys for Trump. No, the real reason why Republicans don't want to impeach Trump isn't because they necessarily like Trump or support him. They don't want to enrage the fringe. And I understand that, particularly as a business person, when you can get a problem settled down without having a vendetta against somebody, that you're always going to choose the road of peace. So so seek the source, seek the facts, don't seek opinion. Opinion is only going to divide us. And the fourth thing is, one of the things, particularly from walking the Appalachian Trail and going to college and working in business, I thought about this. If I know 100 people 95 of them, of this 100, they're decent Americans. And they believe a lot of what you just said, Chuck, at the beginning. They don't believe in certain things being right just because a person feels that that's right. And then the fifth thing is we should always talk with appropriate body language. So if you're talking with somebody and if it's getting tense, watch both people's body language. When you close and you sit back like this, you're not being receptive. You're not hearing their story of why they're saying it. The other thing too, and we stress this a lot in the book, is no name calling, and don't label people because of their point of view. The new buzzword in America is, some people think 60 million of Americans are white supremacists. Now, Chuck, you and I know that isn't even close to true.
That's so ridiculous. It's not even, how do you even start to answer that,
But when you call somebody a name, you've lost the argument.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be no middle ground. There'll be no way to reach. And I heard this woman yelling at a senator in Australia and saying, "Stop mansplaining." Well, are you trying to shame somebody, or are you trying to understand their point of view? And thankfully, the male senator in Australia stopped the woman and said, "No, you can't say things like that. This is our Congress, and we are to act civil. If you think I'm being condescending, that's an appropriate comment, but don't say mansplaining." So we have to learn to lose these adjectives that we use.
It's conversational terrorism, and that's almost exclusively what we see these days in the media, in the social media, is this conversational terrorism, this labeling people, calling names. It's indicative of a culture that does not have any desire to understand the other side. It only has a desire to defeat the other side.
Yeah, and what most Americans don't know, they're being baited. You mentioned this in your introduction, and that's a very good point that you made. Is by the subtle use of labeling, mm-hmm. we're dividing America, mm-hmm. and in turn, CNN would think that they're gaining viewership, but if you look at CNN's viewership over the last 40 years, it's dropped because of this.
Specifically.
So, labeling is in any conversation. If you want to get my hair on the back of my neck up, label somebody. It doesn't have to be a white male you have to label. It could be a black male you're labeling.
Right.
It's still wrong. Mm-hmm. And Jesus wouldn't do that. And that we point this out in the book about not name calling yourself. Don't call yourself names, but don't call other people names.
That to me, let me just point something out and see what you think about it. When we argue when we have conversations with people who don't think the way we do, who disagree with us, we can argue from a position of strength or from a position of weakness. We can argue out of our insecurity, or we can argue from a point of security in who we are and whose we are and who we belong to. I think many times as believers, what we end up doing is arguing from a position of weakness, or at least we come across that way. Mm-hmm. When in reality, if God is in control, and if I belong to Him, and if He has my best interest at heart, then I should never be arguing from a position of weakness. What do you think about that?
I agree. You should always be proud to be a Christian, and you should understand what that means. Take the issue of abortion. A lot of people have taken the easy road out and saying, I personally wouldn't agree to that, but you can do what you want. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not a position. That just means you don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And so, I had a conversation with my mother recently who said, she was pro-abortion. And I said, it's the number one form of murder in America. And her point was, no, that's you men are always trying to tell us women what to do with our bodies. I said, that's nothing to do with your body. This is God knitted you in your womb, and it's in the Bible. And the second thing is that this is one of the things that really bothers me is when people say, don't tell me what to do with my body. Where's the man's voice in this? Where is the man's say in terms of that child? And so, and then people will always get upset with me, but I'm not going to get upset back, but I'm also not going to change my position, and I'm not going to cower away.
I think very often we end up, we don't argue with the people that are on the other side. We argue with caricatures of the people.
Yeah.
So these caricatures that get painted by the media, that get painted by social media. I live in Panama full time, and there are about 150 gringo expats who live in our little community up in the mountains in a volcanic crater, kind of off the beaten path. And up there, beggars can't be choosers. You know, if you want to speak English with somebody, you're probably going to get to talk to somebody who doesn't think like you. And in America, we very often get to live in our little Christian ghetto, our little bubble, and never really go outside of that, except maybe at work or something like that. But in Panama, we don't have that option. So we end up with friends who are mostly, almost exclusively, there are actually very few of our friends who think like we do. And I've been told several times by people, gosh, you're really nice for a conservative. And I think, like, what are you talking about? Like, all the conservatives I know are nice, but they don't know any conservatives. I'm the only one they know. So they have been,
Right.
They've been propagandized to believe that we're, backwards, that we're racist, that we're hillbillies, that we're, just angry, bitter, bigots. And when they actually get to know us, they go, wow, you're not as much of that as I thought you were. And so I think maybe it's that way going both directions. We have some very good friends now who are flaming liberals. And when it comes to talking about things like that, these kinds of hot button issues, I think, first of all, my personal opinion is that I don't really need to have conversations like that with people with whom I don't already have a relationship. You can't just walk up to somebody on the street and start screaming at them about abortion, about gay marriage, about something like that, because you have no weight. Your opinion holds no weight with them. So in that case, you're breaking the commandment of 2 Timothy to not get involved in foolish and stupid arguments that just harm those who hear. But when I have an intimate relationship with somebody already, and I've helped them when they're in need, and I've shared my life with them and had them around my dinner table, and then they bring up a sensitive issue, then I can gently instruct them as the scripture commands in a way that isn't going to send them running or isn't going to make them think I'm a horrible bigot, but is going to actually teach them something. They will be open to learn because we already have that relationship. What do you think about that?
Well, I think your evangelism or evangelism, whether it's Christian evangelism or evangelism for ourselves, always comes through our actions and not our words. And I think that's what you're saying is, if it's 2:00 in the morning, one of your neighbors calls you and you run over and help them, that's evangelism.
Yeah.
And so we should always work on that. And I agree with that you should be very wise always when you have a conversation, whether there's any receptivity. If there isn't, kind of just got to prove that you're worth to the person through your actions. And this is something that Jesus talked about a lot. You take the woman at the well in John 4. Jesus got to know her before he evangelized her.
Right.
And I think that we don't say the gospel, we have to live the gospel. And
so how do you suggest Christians approach that then in this age of cancel culture, where we're being told daily that our faith should exist in our hearts and in our homes, but not in the public square. And so how do we deal with that?
Well, I don't. I think you ignore that. If you get canceled because you have a belief, you have to choose in this life between: are you going to is your permanency going to be with the Lord, or is it going to be with the world?
Yeah.
And that's a choice you have to make. Now, obviously, if you choose the point of the book, and I bet this particular point's in about 7 or 8 of the weeks. If you're going to choose the world, you're always going to be fickle. It's always going to be fickle, and what was out was in, and what was in and out, and all that stuff, Chuck. But Jesus is permanent. So you have to make that choice. So I'm not saying that you run out to street corners with a John 3:16 sign and hold it up. What I'm saying is that everything that you do and say, particularly in the outside, let your actions speak for the Lord and speak for what you stand for.
Yeah, I think that this is a difficult concept for us to grasp as Americans, because we have grown up in a country where Christians, it's a country was founded on Christian principles, and so we've grown up with that great privilege of living in a country where we are free to express our faith, and that's changing. And in that interim, as it changes,
Well,
what's that? Go ahead.
it's never changing. It's always there. The Christian persecution. So here's a statistic for your listeners: 1 in 9 Christians in the world live under extreme persecution. Right. That's a very stark number. In this age of identity politics, where we talk about ageism, racism, thisism, thatism, the Christian community is put upon about as much as any. But it's existed. It existed in the 2nd century and the 3rd century, and it has over time. Our responsibility is to Jesus, not to what the world tells us. I will never be ashamed or embarrassed to say that, I'm a Christian, but I do know there are times where that won't be popular.
Right.
But I'm looking to be popular.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that for most of my life in America, I could proudly proclaim that I was a Christian, and it didn't cost me anything.
Right.
But it's getting to the point where it will become costly. And I've just had a long conversation with a sitting U.S. congressman yesterday about this topic, and about how very soon proclaiming the values of Christianity could cost you your job, could cost you your credit, could cost you your social media platform, and more. And those are things that we have not seen in America before. And I think that that's a difficult prospect, as I think about the fact that, would I be, if I was forced to choose between this house that I love, that I've had for 15 years, that is where my kids grew up, and we've made so many memories, and standing for my Christian faith, wow, that's a choice I've never had to make before. And I would, by virtue of my commitment to Christ, I would have to choose Christ over this house. But I sure don't want to. I sure don't want to have to give up my job. And I think a lot of people in America, when faced with the idea of standing for your faith and losing your job, or just being quiet and keeping your job, or even parroting the slogans that you're being forced to virtue signal and keeping your job, I think a lot of people might just choose to keep their job.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of my formative moments in business was I used to keep a Bible on the front of my desk. And the head of HR came in and said, it's against the policy to do that. And so this is where you can become intimidated.
Yeah.
or you can stand up. And in this case, I stood up and said, show me the policy. There wasn't a policy, as you know, Chuck. That's just an individual expressing their viewpoint that they're offended.
Yeah, right.
70% of Americans believe in Jesus. 70% of Americans, in some way, follow Christian practices. So we're not a small group. So I use that as an example. But the other aspect of that, you can get away with having a Bible on your desk if you live the example that's in the Bible. If you're running around the office, disrupting meetings and things like that, then, do expect some recourse.
Yeah.
But if people know that that's your core and your belief structure, believe me, a lot of people, as they did, will come into your office, shut the door, and ask for help.
Yeah.
And that's what we're known for.
That's a very, very good point. Thank you, Dr. Hartman. I really appreciate that. Sounds like your book is really necessary at this point in time in our country, and I hope a lot of people will go out and pick it up.
Yeah, and I looked at your website too, Chuck. I wanted to compliment you. I actually sent a copy over to the person who does my website, and I said, "This is the way ours should look." So, congratulations.
I'm gonna have to go look at it now, and I don't remember exactly what it looks like anymore.
It's clean. It's perfect. You know who you are, Chuck, from your website, and I love that book. I can get your book Prowess. I can get that on the internet.
The new book, yeah, I can. I'll send you a copy for sure. My Prowess is a follow-up book to my previous book, which is called Making Men. But I have a big reading list this year. I have big goals every year when I start the year, and I will definitely have your book on the top of that list. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for sending the book as well. And I'll send you, I have a new one coming out. It's called, in March, it's called Jesus is Everything. And then I'm doing a 12-part series on heroes of the Bible.
Oh, cool.
So to explaining as opposed to just saying this is what was said. So
great.
We'll see how that goes.
Dr. Bruce Hartman, folks, where can we find your books?
Amazon.com. You can buy them off the website, my website as well. But all my books are on Kindle, and you could download them today.
Okay. Well, I highly encourage you to go out and get those books, and let's see if we can make a difference in this culture by loving the people we meet and bringing help, hope, and love, and not being motivated by fear or pride or comfort in this world, because that's when we do that, we've got nothing to offer the world. So thanks for being a part of it, Dr. Hartman, and look forward to reading it. Take care.
Yeah, amen. God bless.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.